He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by him all the things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible. Whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things were created by him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have supremacy. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. Once you were alienated from God and were enemies in your minds because of your evil behavior. But now he has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you holy in his sight, and without blemish and free from accusation. If you continue in your faith, established and firm, not moved from the hope held out in the gospel. This is the gospel that you heard and that has been proclaimed to every creature under heaven, of which I, Paul, have become a servant. Hello. Welcome to the online message of Corinth Christian Church. You don't have to listen or watch the news for too long before you hear about some actor or celebrity who has done something wrong. In 2013, Reese Witherspoon was arrested for impeding the investigation into her husband's drunk driving. The next year, actor Shia LaBeouf was arrested for causing a disturbance in a Broadway theater during the performance of the musical Cabaret. 3 years later, Alec Baldwin was arrested for riding his bicycle against traffic in Manhattan. And every one of these instances had something in common. When they were arrested, they became belligerent and demanded to be let go with the words, "Don't you know who I am?" In their minds, the concept of their identity should change how they're treated when they misbehave. They are so self-important, they believe that the issue of who they are should make the rest of us feel unworthy to question what they do. Have you ever noticed how many times in the Bible this question comes up about Jesus, about who he is? Even people who knew him best at times ask, "Who is this person?" The disciples ask, "Who is this that even the winds and the waves obey him?" John the Baptist asked, "Are you the Messiah, or should we be looking for someone else?" Jesus himself asked the disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" There are a lot of actors and singers and sports personalities who think that the fact that who they are should change everything for them. The fact that Jesus is who he is does change everything. And that's the theme of the book of Collossians, that Jesus is supreme, that he is over all, greater than the greatest earthly power that has ever or ever will exist. There's nothing that Jesus is not superior to. He is over all, regardless of whatever your all is. And that's the point that Paul's trying to get across to the Christians here in Colossae. There is a problem in the church that today a lot of biblical scholars refer to as Colossian heresy. Now, it's not completely clear all the details of what was going on, but there are several things that we can understand based on Paul's letter here to the Colossians. First of all, it sounds like there's a lot of teaching that says following Jesus isn't enough, that you have to have some special knowledge, and you get this special knowledge by practicing these extra rules, and that you do about what you can and what you can't do, and observing certain special ceremonies and going through all of this. And if you do enough and you practice enough and you celebrate these special ceremonies enough, then you'll be given this special knowledge. You'll understand these extra truths. And the Colossians, some of them believed only then could you really be saved. The key idea here was to be as great as Jesus was. That Jesus was only a created being. He was less than God, and so because of that, he wasn't enough. And so Paul's attacking these false teaching and lies with this truth. Jesus is God in the flesh. He begins in verse 15 by saying that Jesus is the visual image of the invisible God. Now, some try to say that Paul's saying that Jesus is like a picture of God, like a statue. He looks like the original, but it's not. But that's not what he's saying. The word translated as image here means manifestation. It's the appearance of the real thing. The real thing has appeared. And just to make it clear, if you go down to verse 19, it says, God was pleased, wanted to exhibit all the fullness of Himself in Jesus. If that's not enough, in Colossians 2:9, he says, in Christ all the fullness of the deity lives in bodily form. When he uses this word image here, maybe he uses it because when God was speaking with Moses, said, no one can look at my face and live. That in God's heavenly glorified state, no one could look directly at Him and live. But when God comes to earth, He takes on a human face. That face of God, that image could be seen. It was seen by thousands at times. One truth about Jesus that the Scripture never questions is that Jesus is God. We might question it, but the Bible doesn't, Jesus doesn't, the disciples don't. We understand Jesus is God through the Bible. And that's important to know because the question of who Jesus is still a pretty prevalent today. Some people around say Jesus was a good man, a great teacher, but He wasn't God. C.S. Lewis describes the thinking this way when he said Jesus could not have been just a really good man. Any person who said the things about himself that Jesus said was either a liar hoping to cheat people out of something, or more likely some sort of nut, paranoid schizophrenic with delusions of grandeur. See, Jesus said if you don't believe in Him, you're going to die in your sins. Jesus said He and the Father were one. Jesus said that He was around before Abraham was, and He used the phrase I am to describe Himself, which was the name of God. Jesus said no one can come to the Father except through Him. Now, if we heard someone say that today, we wouldn't think, this is a good guy that has a lot of good things to say and good teaching, and he'd make us better people. We'd look at him and say, how long before they commit him? How long before they haul him off? We don't want anything to do with him because we would think he's crazy to say some of these things. Or we would say the opposite of that and say, he's right. You look at the evidence, the undeniable fact that He rose from the dead, the miracles that He performed, the eyewitnesses who were willing to die torturous deaths rather than deny what they knew to be true. And what we realize is that Jesus is God. Whatever is divine about our Father is also true of the Son. Whatever makes God God also makes Jesus God. And unlike celebrities being celebrities, Jesus being God does make a difference. Paul describes that He has supremacy over all. Says He's the firstborn over all creation. It doesn't mean He was created first. It's describing the fact that the firstborn male in any child had privilege and authority over all the rest. And that's what Paul's saying here. He's saying that Jesus has power and privilege and authority that places Him over everything. Everything you can see on earth, everything that you can't see, everything in the heavens, everything above us. Jesus is over all. You know, when God said, let us make man in our image, Jesus was the us and the our. When He says all things are created by Him and for Him, there are people that maybe ask, why did God create the universe so vast with so many planets if there's just this one planet with us on it? Why all of these planets if it's just us in the universe? Why make the oceans so deep that people can't get to the bottom of it? And the reason is because God didn't do it for us. The reason He did it is because He wanted it. He made the ocean so deep. He made this trench in the ocean so deep because He wanted it. He made the stars so far away that no one could realistically think going there because He can and He wanted to. And so we look at them and we're amazed at how great God is. It says that creation itself holds together because of Jesus. Several years ago, scientists began to wonder about how all the matter holds itself together. They began to theorize about subatomic particle that keeps all the atoms linked to all the others, that without it, all substance comes flying apart. And they nicknamed this particle the God particle. See, what they were saying is that there's this little particle that holds everything together. But what they didn't realize is that it had already been identified 2,000 years ago. That's what Paul says in this passage. He said, Jesus holds the universe together. Jesus is the God particle that holds everything together. This passage also says Jesus is the supreme leader of the church. He's the head and we're not. He's in charge, we're not. He bought it with His life. He alone gets to determine what's taught. We don't get to change it because it doesn't seem up to date or inclusive enough. He also says that He's the firstborn among the dead. You know, there were a lot of people that rose from the dead before Jesus. Jesus is recorded as raising 3 people from the dead Himself. But the difference is no one before Him or after Him ever raised themselves from the dead. Only Jesus. And just like the idea we talked about a moment ago about the firstborn son, and it describes here Jesus as the firstborn among the dead, it doesn't mean He was the firstborn, the first one to be created. But what it means again is that Jesus now has authority over death. Jesus has a place that's been exalted over death. Just like as the firstborn of creation, He is over all of that. He is also over and can exercise authority over death. And He did that in His life, and someday He's going to do that again when He's going to call all those who are dead in Him to rise up to join Him. That's who Jesus is. He is God. He is greater than all else. He is over all. Now some of you might say, well, what does that have to do with me? First of all, if Jesus is God in the flesh, it answers questions that people have asked throughout history when they wondered, what's God really like? The answer to that is we can just look at Jesus. If you want to know what God is really like and what He thinks about sin, we can look to Jesus. Some people say God's not concerned about how we live. He's got bigger things to worry about. He's got more important things on His plate. He doesn't really care if I'm just breaking a few rules. Well, let's look at Jesus. Jesus seemed to take sin seriously. He was always ready to forgive, but His harshest words were spoken for those who were involved in sin and pretended to be holy. He called them whitewashed tombs. That's what God describes for those who have sinned. Ever wonder if God really is concerned about sin? We can look at Jesus. You know, there's other areas that we can look at Jesus and find out what God's like. Want to know what God's like when we're guilty of sin? When we both know, when God knows and I know that we did something wrong? Once Jesus was teaching early in the morning when a group of religious leaders drugged this woman up who had been caught in adultery. And they asked Jesus, what should we do? The law says stone her to death. Jesus didn't respond the way that they thought He would. What He did is He showed mercy and compassion. In the end, He told her, I don't condemn you. But He also said, don't go and sin any longer. God hates sin, but He loves the sinner. Maybe you think, well, what about if I did sin? Is God going to punish me? Are bad things going to happen in my life as a result of what I did wrong? Am I going to lose my child? Am I going to lose my home? Am I going to lose my marriage? Is God going to hate me? One time Jesus and disciples passed by a man who was born blind. They asked, who sinned so that this man was born blind, his parents or himself? And Jesus said, neither of them sinned. This happened so that you can see the glory of God. See, that's God speaking there. Maybe our pain, maybe our suffering, as bad as it might be, has a purpose of pointing someone back to God. Maybe it's hard to understand right now, but later we will. What about when I'm grieving? Does God care about that? Remember the story of Lazarus? Jesus was friends with Lazarus. He came to a town where he lived 4 days after he had died. He saw Lazarus' sisters in the crowd that were mourning, and his sisters were hurting. And Jesus, here it says, he wept. He did that in spite of the fact that he knew he was about to raise him from the dead. You ever think about it? When you cry, maybe God does too. You know, the biggest thing about the truth that Jesus is God, that He's over all, is that He came to reconcile the world back to Himself. Paul said that He is going to bring fallen sinners back to the Father through His sacrifice. Said before Jesus, we were alienated from God. The word means we're banished. We were His enemies. And that's a bad place to be. But now through Jesus, our enemy status has been revoked. Now we're holy and without blemish, free from accusation. And that changes us. It has the power to make us better than we can achieve on our own. It's a far cry from what many people say, from what some would call the Oprah idea. If we give people better opportunities, more education, then they'll become better people just by themselves. Well, there's a couple problems with that. Number one, it doesn't seem to be working. There's already been so much that has been done to improve our education system, to open up more opportunities for those having a harder time, to make it better than ever before, to add financial aid programs and to community colleges and to make higher education available to everyone. And on it goes. And we see that we have more schools and more colleges and now we can go online even. And the world seems to be in a worse shape than it's ever been. You know, and one of the worst acts that our country's ever had happened to us on 9/11, the people who orchestrated and perpetuated it were all highly educated and came from wealthy families. See, education by itself, wealth by itself, better opportunities by themselves is not going to change the world for the better. The only thing that changes this world for the better is Jesus. Now, you know, there are some things that I feel like I'm pretty good at. There's some things that I feel like I could do pretty well. There's some skills that I even have that I think I can build things or take things apart and put things back together. But when it comes to computers, sometimes I don't think I'm quite as good as I think I am. I'll get into computer and I'll start working on it and I'll try to fix something and I want to think I can fix this, and before too long I'm calling my friends who know something about computers. I've just made it worse. I've called them and say, I just did this. I'm in a panic. Can I get this back? Can I fix this? You know, I try to fix things and sometimes I just make it worse. And trying to fix my life by myself often just makes it worse. In my life, God created it to be a certain way. And I've often heard that for us to really be what we need to be, we just need to learn to be ourselves. I don't know that that's true. I think we need to learn to be what Jesus wants us to be. And Jesus can help us to be that person with His help, not by myself. All this is made possible because Jesus was willing to give up His life so that we could have a life instead. You know, that He could make a difference in our life and give us life. Remember what we said earlier? Now, before Jesus came, we were alienated from God. We were banished from God. That's what hell is. And because of Jesus, because He's over all, we don't have to go there. We don't have to be banished from God. We don't have to be separated Him because He is over all. What about this morning? Is Jesus over all of your life? Have you accepted Him and given your life to Him and dedicated your life to follow Him, to serve Him? Have you allowed Jesus to be Lord of your life? Maybe you never made that decision. Maybe today God's calling you to accept Jesus. That is in this passage, it describes Him as being supreme. See, Jesus is supreme, and the question is whether we will accept it or not. And you have an opportunity to make a decision in your life today that Jesus will be supreme and Lord over all of your life because He is God. And that without Him, we are banished from Him. Why not today allow Jesus to make a difference in your life? Why not today allow Him to be Lord of your life? If you have a decision to make, I invite you to call me. We can talk about that decision, and we can make preparations for you to give your heart and life completely to Him. That you can know Him in the fullest way, and that you can have a life of hope and trust in the promises that Jesus has offered to you. I look forward to hearing from you. Until next week, God bless you. Take care. I love you.